welcome to another brand new episode here on 1950's Farm. So how are you all doing? Hope you're all having a good day. My day is not going too bad. I've got a cold and a sore throat, the same as the rest of the house, but otherwise we're grand. So yeah, what are we up to today? Well, today, as you can see, we have finally got ourselves an oldie worldy slurry spreader. So yes, it's been a much requested job. Well, I say much requested. Someone briefly mentioned it ages ago. But yeah, as I say, we can get round to now finally spreading it on the grass. So as you can see, this is the second field. So in one of last week's episodes, I can't remember which one it was, I spread the I cut the grass, we baled it, and then we collected it. In fact, that might have been over the 3 episodes last week. I can't remember now. Like I say, I've had a couple of days of being completely completely high on paracetamol and God knows what else. But I'm not supposed to take paracetamol either. And now I know why, because with my tablets it does react quite badly. Anyway, so I've slept for quite a bit. I feel like Sleeping Beauty. Yeah, so as I say, but last week we got the grass cut, and then this field was the one I said I was going to do off camera, which I did do, and I was pleased I did do sort of almost straight away when I said that after I ended the episode, because I don't think I would have felt like doing it otherwise. But yeah, so we got it done, and I thought we'd spread some fertilizer, some slurry on there as fertilizer, and get it done, get the job complete. And say these fields are going to be coming. Well, obviously they're going to be grass, but we're going to silage them later on in the autumn. Once we get harvest out of the way, we're going to silage these. So we'll get the old John Deere flail out of the shed again, and with our trailer on the back, and we will proceed to, as I say, turn our grass into silage, and feed that to the cows again over winter, because that worked very well. We've done all of the hay baling now, so we've got 160, I think it said, or 163, something like that. We've got say them hay bales now, so we've got everything we should need now up until next spring, when we obviously do the hay again, and then any that we've got remaining, we will then just sell off like we did this year, and then make our fresh again. So yeah, it's as I say, not going too bad. It's not bad at all. I quite like this little slurry tanker. It's a shame it's only got a 2,000 litre capacity, but it is just enough, as you saw, for me to get round the field. The headland of the field. We'll do probably 3 or 4 rounds, and then we'll start going up and down, and we'll just do it until we run out. But once we run out, it's no problem. We can then switch over to manure, because I've got an absolute ton of that. So we can literally just be chucking manure on everything. But as I say, at first, what we'll do is we will get the slurry spread first, because those tanks in both the cow barns need emptying. So we'll do that. But yeah, otherwise things going okay. Things going fairly well down on 1950's farm. I think within the end of this week, I think there's a very good chance that we'll be harvesting our wheat. And I mean the end of this week, as in the 3 days of recording that I've got for 1950's. We should be into our harvest. That isn't going to be too far away. I'm considering buying this field to the left of me and the field to the right of me, and then owning the sort of 4 fields that directly surround the farm. As I've said many times before, the dairy was rapidly expanding in the 1950s, so I've been doing quite a bit more sort of research and quite a bit more sort of looking into the history of not only the dairy but America in general, in the Ohio sort of region, and trying to kind of see what not only was sort of Harry and the the dairy doing, but also as well what the general consensus in America was and what the general sort of people were doing in America. So in 1947, as I've said many times before, and I'm certainly not going to go over it again in this video, but Harry S. Truman made his state address to Congress and said that there was going to be huge incentives for people to go into farming and industry in general, but farming. And his big dream was that America was going to feed not only America but also the free world as well. And as I say, they were for the time that they were in, there was massive incentives, sort of put forward and put up for. I don't think I'll quite get around, so I'll go and fill it again. I know it's half full, but I don't think I'll make it all the way around before it empties. Yeah, so as I say, big incentives for people to start farming, and from 1947 up to 1950, sort of 2/3, farming and food production exploded, and it's from what I was reading yesterday. The food being produced in America in 1953 to 1954 had doubled that of which was being produced in the peacetime from between the First World War and the beginning of the Second World War. So in that sort of couple of years period, and then pre-First World War as well, the levels were far exceeding that as well, and that was put down to not only the hard work of the American people, and sort of and taking up the challenge, if you like, of of producing the food that was needed to be produced, but it was also down to the fact that not only was Harry S. Truman paying incentives to people to take up farming, to take up industry, to take up haulage, to take up sort of everything, but he was also, and I've said this as well before, and again we're not really going to be covering this in this episode, and you have to bear with me because if my voice gives out, then my voice gives out, but it's a bit scratchy today. But yeah, so not only was he sort of insensitizing the the public, it was also manufacturers and as I say, like other industries as well. And part of the reason why food production had sort of doubled in a relatively short space of time, when you think about it, if you think from sort of 1935, 36, maybe 38, somewhere around there. Food production was at one level, but sort of 20 years later, food production had doubled, and that was largely down to agricultural manufacturers who, again, were being offered incentives to make farming much simpler, safer, faster, and machinery that was more reliable, that was capable of doing more work for longer hours, and sort of all of that then played into the hands of everyone really involved in sort of food production and things like that, and so the dairy, and as was the general consensus, so by 1953, a lot of the farms that had taken up the incentives, that were growing food, that were growing livestock, were starting to go bust and bankrupt, or they were starting to sell up. Now, this is something that I learned yesterday that really interested me, and I'm going to look more into it. So a lot of people took up the farming incentives to farm and produce food for the years that the money was available. Now, the money was available, as far as I can understand, and as I've said before, I'm not the brightest light bulb in the box. So, but as far as I can understand, the money was available, the incentives were available for 5 years, and that was considered enough to get you on your feet and get your business profitable and able to self-sustain. And in that 5 years, you're expected to have livestock, you're expected to do crop farming, and certainly in the Ohio region, so that would be, mainly wheat, soybeans, corn, sort of, sort of crops of that ilk. So, basically row crop farming, as I read yesterday. So that was what was going on. Um, but what a lot of people did was, at the end of their 5th year payment, they sold up. And they sold up, bear in mind that when they started out, they had land that was, sort of being given to them almost, because they needed, to produce food on, a massive scale. So, the land itself was kind of given to them in a way. It was being given away. And these people, these, and I can only call them smart, intelligent people. And I know that might sound wrong, but they'd figured out that actually, if they did as they were told for 5 years, took the money, grew the livestock, or raised the livestock, grew the crops, and what have you, that actually what they could do was, when that 5 years was up and that final sort of 5th year payment was in, they could sell their house, their land, and their farms, and cash in on the livestock, cash in on the machinery, as say, and sell the land and the farms. And they could go off to the bigger cities. New Orleans was mentioned quite a bit. Cincinnati, was also mentioned quite a bit, and we've done some history in these videos on Cincinnati and how that, became to become a big settlement. And they moved off to the big cities, built their big houses, got jobs in, banking and sort of whatever else, and actually lived very, very, very comfortable lives. And these were originally, what would be considered poor people, but they'd seen an opportunity. And my dad used to say about a group of people that we knew, they may be poor, but they're not stupid. And my dad's favourite saying was, give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, but give him a fishing rod and teach him to fish, he will eat for the rest of his life. And I guess kind of in a way this was what was happening. It was that the American government inadvertently were giving, these people with this in mind, the fishing rod and the skill to fish, for 5 years. And then it was a case of they'd sort of taken and got everything they wanted out of it, sold up, and then built their houses on the, sort of like the suburbs and the outskirts of the big cities like Cincinnati and, say, New Orleans. There was quite a few cities that were listed. And for people like Harry and the dairy, this represented it, certainly for Harry, because he was one of the people that had, sort of taken up the incentive. So his dad had been had sort of farmed the land, if you like, before him. But what had happened was that his dad was also running a full-time job. So his dad was kind of sort of farming weekends and evenings and, whenever time and, sort of daylight hours allowed. And his dad was getting to the point where it was make or break, really. Then the incentive came along. Harry was working for the dairy, was also obviously helping his dad as well. And his dad said that, you should take up the incentive, you should, take up the offer, carry on with our farm. So one thing I have missed out that I wasn't. It's not very straight, is it? It doesn't matter. The one thing that I had sort of kind of missed out with Harry was that they had hogs, which until yesterday I'd obviously completely overlooked. Um, and probably, by the sort of, feel of things, I discarded as well. So it might well be that on Harry's farm we get some pigs at some point, because they had hogs, and they also had a few dairy cows as well. Now, I didn't realise that. I thought that Harry just had beef stock, and that was what he was, sort of raising. But no, they also had, I think it was 30 dairy cows as well. Another interesting fact as well that I didn't realise, in the 1950s, in 1953, 54. So I assumed, wrongly as it turns out, but I assumed that milking was done by hand. Hence the reason why dairies only had, sort of between 20 to sort of 40 cows maximum, was because they were milking them by hand. Turns out that's not the case. So by the time the 1950s, the early to mid 1950s came along, milking machines were very much in operation, were in very much use in the 1950s, which surprised me a lot, actually, to be fair. So you've got all of this kind of, as I say, going on, and the dairy, and Harry himself, who, as I say, by 1953, 54, 55, had started to sort of kind of come to the conclusion that, like a lot of people in his position, you have to remember the dairy was established, long before the war. The dairy was, a sort of a established, steadily growing farm anyway. And although they didn't get the level of incentives that Harry would have got for starting out, they were still given incentives, a bit like in the UK, like single farm payments and stuff like that. Um, you know, uh, it was that sort of kind of arrangement where, they were making additional money on top of the money they were already making. It wasn't a great deal of money, but it was a little bit more. And the more you grew, the more you produced, the more you got. And I think, and that's how, in a way, the single farm payment in the United Kingdom worked up until the point of it being stopped. And the reason it was stopped was because what the farmers were doing were they were buying a farm, then they were buying another farm, but they were running that farm in a completely different name. So now they're getting two single farm payments, able to produce the absolute, high numbers that they needed to earn the maximum they needed. Then they would buy a third farm, then they would put that under a different name, and then they would have three lots of single farm payments coming in. And because this is, hence the reason why it's, as I understand it, and this was a farmer kind of trying to explain to me what was going on. um, and he said, I think people in the end got wise to to what we were doing. He said, but we did it. He said, so I'm not criticising, and I'm not having a go at anyone. He said, because we were doing it. He said we had, or they've still got, because even though they don't get the payments now, they've kept the farms on. But he said, we've got 3 council farms that we were doing that with, and sort of our main farm, which is Dad's farm. So yeah, but that's the reason why I stopped. But I'm guessing that in America, although it wasn't called single farm payment, I'm guessing it was a similar sort of thing where you were already farming and they were like, well, you were already doing great work anyway. Here's a little bit of extra, and by the way, the more you can produce, the more we'll give you. So they were still being given money, but as I say, they were an already established farm, and so, by 19, as I say, 53, 54, 55, around there, food was plentiful, land was becoming plentiful, because, as I say, there were a lot of people that were getting out and going off to the cities, and doing that. Some people were able to, sort of sell everything for enough to live quite a basic life, but retire on what they'd sort of made and sold through farming. Some got rid of the farms but kept a little bit of a a few acres of land. Well, I suppose in America it'd be hectares, but in England we would say acres. Kept a few acres of land and sort of lived off the land, lived off, a couple of cows or some hogs or whatever, and had sort of relatively comfortable lives, and so therefore, it was, as I say, it was a very prosperous time. But for farmers, it was becoming a bit of a nightmare because they had all of this food that they were producing, and now no one to buy it, because not only were America, of course, doing all of these incentives, but the UK, I'm learning, from my friend Ray, that, the UK was doing a similar type thing, and then you go all the way across Europe, and their governments were doing, similar kinds of things. And of course, what happened was, and I've said this before, and again, we're not really going to go into it in this episode, but you have 20, a silly number, and this is not numbers that I've read, this is just made up, but you've got 20 billion tons of wheat or corn or whatever, or we'll say wheat because it's widely grown across sort of most of the world, and you've got 20 billion tons of it, ridiculous number, I know, but just for argument's sake, and you've got no one to buy it, because everyone's already got all of the wheat that they already need, and the 20 billion tons of wheat is the excess that's left over. And I've said before, certainly in America, this was where it was most prominent, that farmers were, using their corn and they were cutting it down as whole plants, letting it die, and then cutting it down, and then using it as fuel for for home eating, and their fires and stuff like that. And obviously, if you had cattle, you could obviously still feed it to the cattle. As I've said before, and we did a video on it. Silage was becoming more and more popular in America at that point, and again, the farms that were willing to embrace that were willing to kind of say, well, okay, this is a tough situation, but we need to make what we can, and then we need to try and still grow as much as we can as a business, and get through this difficult period. And I mean, Harry, is quite open about it, and says, that there were many nights when he sat with a pen and a pad, and he was working out budgets, and he was working out, this, that, and everything out. Well, his dad was, sort of working this out and what have you, because it was his dad. Sorry, I've got it a little bit mixed up. So it was Harry's dad that lived with his dad, that worked for the dairy, and then so it was. Hang on, I've confused myself now with the Hill family. So Harry is the guy that took it on, and he gave birth to a son, which was Hank. And it was Hank that would eventually, in today's world, now be running the farm, but he's about to pass it on to Serenity. So I got myself a little bit confuddled there. Yeah, so Hank is Harry's son. So Harry is the one that took on the incentives, that was working for the dairy in the night. Right, I've got it now. Because I was sort of talking in my head, going, "Nah, this doesn't feel right. I think I've got this mixed up somehow." But I have. I've got Harry and Hank mixed up. Harry's the dad, and he was working for his dad, not the other way around. Harry sort of. Anyway, sorry about that. I just completely lost track. But for Harry and for the dairy, I think, sort of advising Harry, was sort of saying, look, if you can make ends meet, and if you can, sort of ride the storm out, so to speak, get buying land, because there's going to come a point where we're going to tip back the other way again, and then there's not, because no one's going to produce food, because no one needs it, and then all of a sudden there's going to be a shortage again. And in future episodes, I'm going to go into what the American government did to stop it from happening again. So the measures and the laws and the rules that were put into place in food production, and quite a lot of these laws and rules and things are actually still evident in Great Britain today. So we're still limited to what we can, like potatoes, which I know I'm not sure about now as such, but when I was farming, you had to get a license to grow potatoes, and you had to get a license for two reasons. One was to use the chemicals that you need to use to kill the potatoes off and to look after the potatoes through the year with the blight spraying and everything else. But the second reason was because in your license you told, whether it was the council, I don't know really who it was that you were telling, whether it was DEFRA, whether it was the council, whether whoever it was, you were telling them how much you were going to grow, and if it was what they deemed too much, then they would set the amount of acreage that you could grow for potatoes. I think I've got that right. I will speak to Ray about that again. But anyone in the comments that wants to put me right on that, feel free also. But like I say, I think I've remembered that correctly from Ray. Yeah. So as I say, we're the dairy is buying land. Because they were not only were they expanding all through the good years when food was needed and everything like that, and they were able to produce high quantities of food. You know, they'd also predicted that this was going to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if they'd sort of given this information, passed it on to Harry, and he was able to sort of what can I say, sort of counteract it as well. And an interesting fact, actually, the reason why Harry, so there's a reason actually why Harry had to get dairy cows. Now, I say I'd overlooked a lot of this as a massive sugar beet harvester goes past my window. I apologise if you heard that. That was really loud. That was. I wonder what the hell was happening. I thought a plane was going to land on the lawn. But yeah, the reason that Harry had to get, so as I say, he was farming weekends and nights, and whenever he could, and still going out to work in the day to the dairy, and he had other sort of jobs in. I ran out, darn it. He had other jobs that he was. Sort of doing in the sort of day and evenings as well, and he was helping out with haulaging and different things. And he sort of sat down, and it was kind of like it was really tight, and they were obviously farming and they were buying land, and they were living on a real shoestring budget. But he sort of kind of gone with his gut and thought, farming at some point, and in the 60s, the reboom of farming came along, and that's when Harry and sort of the dairy and no doubt other people in America really started to make money and make their livelihoods from farming, and make it so that it was comfortable for them, sort of all of the time. That would come in the 60s, that coincided with much bigger equipment, much more reliable equipment, so forth. You've got to remember that the farming sort of industry grew as rapidly as what it did through the sort of late 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s. Even today, really, when you think about New Holland and what they're doing with their combines and what have you. I can't. Hang on, I need to just raise up a little bit because I can't see the line. Let's drive down. Normally it shows up the line. I've now lost where I was. I was in a nice little rhythm there. I can't even see the bloody wheel marks of where we came. Ah, there we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. We've picked the line up again. Right, so I think it's down here somewhere by the looks of that. Yeah, so as I say, they the farming and its boom, coincided, as I say, with equipment getting bigger, more reliable. But as I say, Harry had been doing his sums and what have you, and realised that things was going to be very bad for a few years, and his wife, as I understand it, was fully prepared for that. But Harry, not only did he have Hank in the early 1950s. So in 1953, he had his daughter, who is mentioned only as his daughter. So I, don't have a name or anything for her, and he had his daughter, and his daughter was very poorly, and in and out of hospital and different things in the early parts of her life, and eventually she got diagnosed with having an intolerance to milk formula, and the doctors had suggested at the hospital that they try her on goat's milk, and so Harry had to get a dairy goat, and in the end he got a few dairy goats, which is a pity we're not on FS25 doing this series, because we could have got goats. So we're going to have to swap the goats for cows. But once he kind of realised that not only was his daughter no longer ill when drinking goat's milk, but he kind of sort of began to think, well, hang on, how many other people are experiencing what we experience? And so he got a few more goats, and then a few cows, and that's kind of how that grew. So he ended up with, I think, in total 8 goats, I think, and hogs. So he had 50 finishing hogs, and then 20 dairy cows as well on his farm, and not only that, but he was buying land at the time, as was the dairy. They were also buying land at the time, and that's why I'm half tempted to buy the 2 fields sort of either side of this one. Excuse me 1 second. Excuse me. Anyway. Yeah, so as I say, God, I hate colds. Since August, I think this is my 7th now, 7th, 8th, 9th, something like that. I just seem to be getting them one after the other. I was in the queue last night for fish and chips, and I literally stood in there, and I've not been sort of, and don't get me wrong, I'm not feeling rough today because of last night, it doesn't work like that, but I've sort of not generally been sort of too bad with my cold. It's been sort of annoying. I've had a bit of a sore throat, which, I'm sort of not keen on sore throats, but in general, as I say, I've not been sort of too bad. But I was in the queue for fish and thank God I was there early. So we have a van that comes to the village every Tuesday and brings, because we don't have a fish and chip shop. Our nearest one is like in the towns, which is like between 5, and then another town which is 7 miles away. One's 5, one's 7, another one's I think 6, and then another one's 15 miles from like where we live. So this lovely couple have sort of kind of bought a fish and chip van, and they come out to the village every Tuesday, and as I say, we go get our fish and, well, last night we went and got our fish and chips because my mum's got this cold flu thing as well. She's like, oh, I don't want to cook, and I said, oh, that's okay. I said, like, I'll go fetch us fish and chips from the van, no problem. I said, like, save washing up, save you cooking, whatever. Anyway, I'm in the bloody queue. As I'm standing there, and like as I say, I was there early, so for a little while I was the only one there, and because it gets there at 4:30, I was there at about 20 past 4, and anyway, I was sort of waiting in the queue, and then sort of 20 to 5 came along, and they cook it to order, so they don't have loads cooked. They just, you order, they cook it, and so there is a little bit of a wait, not a ridiculous amount of time to wait, but there is a little bit of a wait anyway. So I'm standing there, and it's cold, and the lady in the fish and chip van's sort of talking to me. Anyway, a bloke comes along, he's the next person, and he puts his order in, and as soon as he's finished his order, and he's coughing, and and I'm thinking, well, that's bloody good, isn't it? I'm thinking, well, I've already got it, so I'm thinking I should be fine. I should be okay. Then sort of another couple of 3 people come, and then they're all coughing, and I'm thinking, Jesus, and literally I stood in the queue till about sort of 4:45, because they don't start cooking till 4:30. So I put my order in, but she was like, "We don't start cooking till 4:30." Okay, why you can't cook now? There's no law against it, but whatever. You know. And it was nice to be out in the fresh air, to be fair. It was pretty cold. It was very wet because it was raining, but it was nice to be out in the fresh air. And anyway, sort of chatted to her, and then say all these people come, and every single person in the queue was coughing, and I was like, Jesus Christ! I'm thinking, I'm glad I didn't come here well. Lord knows what I'd go home with. I'd go home with more than fish and chips, I can tell you. But anyway, it was very nice again. My fish and chips, my mushy peas, and a nice big bag of scraps, because I've become quite a regular with the chip van. And I said to the lady, I said, you know, you do the regular size scrap bags. She's like, yes. I said, can I have another one? Can I have two? She said, no, you can have a big one. So I said, oh, okay, thank you. She goes, and I'll charge you the normal price. I was like, oh, thank you very much. She said, because you do come most weeks. I said, well, we do like your fish and chips. They are very nice. And yeah, so that's very good. But yeah, so as I say, the dairy and Harry, you know, were buying land, growing bigger, and that's why I've kind of sort of thought about maybe buying the two fields to the left and to the right of me, so one to the left, one to the right, and sort of going from there, and having that as sort of the land that the dairy will have then up until sort of the 60s and then the 70s, where again farming took a bit of a downturn in the 70s, and not for many years, to be fair. It wasn't long before, you know, the I'm not going to say a boom, but a farming prosperity sort of few years came, prosperous few years came again. But again, at that point, the dairy took its opportunity to again take any farms that went out of business or decided that they were going out of business and sold up, and the dairy were there buying more land, and you know, that's obviously how they sort of grew their business. And now, you know, they're I'd have to look up again how many thousands of acres they are, or hectares, or whatever. And it's the same with Harry now. I mean, you know, I think him and his family, sorry, not Harry, Hank, I think he and his family now, in today's world, have kind of decided that they've got pretty much to where they want to be, and that's what they want to farm, and that's what they're comfortable with. And you know, it's a nice mix between, you know, you're farming and making good money, but you're also having time for your family. And I think, you know, that's important. I think sometimes, you know, we not just in farming, but in every industry, we sometimes forget about you know, our families, and the most important thing in our lives are our families, and spending time with them, and sharing moments with them. And yeah, we need to sort of remember that. But I say, I hope you've kind of enjoyed that. There are probably things that I'll remember that I, you know, sort of had, because what I do is I write it all down. I then learn all my lines, memorize it all, and then the next day, so then I sleep, and then the next day I come on to onto 1950s, and I like record the episode and think to myself, right, that's what I'm going to talk about today, that's what I'm going to, you know, sort of do. And I think I've sort of pretty much memorised everything that I really wanted to memorise for today, and sort of give again a little bit of a history. And so, and I will talk a little bit about the new Bremen, I think it's called, area where this map is set, where funnily enough, Harry and the dairy are actually not far. So I really did hit the nail on the head with this map. And the more I'm sort of researching, and the more I play the map, the more I find out about the history of the map. And thanks to a couple of people that I've spoken to privately, that have been involved in making this map, that have been involved in making the version of this that's now out for FS25. So if anyone's interested in downloading it, is a beta, or better, or however you sort of want to say that, a beta. So there are problems and issues with it, but it is available. It's on itch.io, and I think it's Farmer Mike that or Farm with Mike or something like that, who's converting it over. And I haven't downloaded it myself yet, just because time. Sort of haven't got there myself, but it is available, this map, for FS25, as I say, in beta form, and I'm sure if you download it and you come across problems and share them on the map makers itch.io page, that he'll be very grateful, and you can help to sort of test the map and get it to where eventually it can be a full-on proper version with no errors and working very well. But yeah, so as I say, go to there and check that out. And who knows, when we get a year, 2 years down the line, and Farming Sim 25 eventually gets fixed, and all the errors and bugs and everything else are out of it, and there's old machinery and old equipment available, who knows, we might even port this over to FS25. But I will say this now, that is very unlikely. But yeah, so anyway, as I say, with the people that I've been talking to about this area, about sort of and where Harry and the dairy and everything is, so the New Brennan area in Ohio, it's not easy for me to say though, it was actually a German colony that started it in 1872. Sorry, in 1772. I beg your pardon. And they began to make. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I won't tell you about it. I'll get all my facts and my dates absolute in my head, and then I'll tell you how and where it all came from and how it all started. And because the German settlers in 1772, and then in 1882, 1886, and then 1902, they were fundamental in Ohio being the state that it is today. I think, if I remember correctly, they either managed to get it to be the 17th state or the 27th state of the United States of America, I think. Like I say, I will go through it all, and I'll memorise it all properly, and sort of give the history of how Ohio and the surrounding areas came to be what they are today. Yeah, hopefully, as I say, that will be another enjoyable video. I'm going to try and switch over to more history-based episodes rather than just sort of general based. That does mean that we're going to be doing quite a lot of sort of, I guess, chatty videos, but they're not really chatty videos because I'm actually telling you about the history and different things. And I know that because I've been looking back over so this series has been running just over a year now, and I'm keen to sort of push it forwards, but at the same time I was keen to kind of see what the beginning sort of, I think I watched the first 20 episodes to kind of see what my intentions were back then, and whether I've lost my way or whatever. And I think I have a little bit, because my intention was to bring the history, bring the, not only of the Hill family, not only of the dairy, but also, America as a wider sort of country and the population and what have you. And so I think we're going to sort of, over the next coming weeks and months, we're going to have an episode a week where we do talk history, and I do give a little bit about the the area, whether it's the area of Ohio itself, whether it's farm machinery, whether it's the Hill and the the Hill family, or the dairy, or them two combined, or whatever, and sort of get back to what I originally set out. Because the first video that I put out of this series, I can't remember how many comments are in that video, but it's really, I was like, I did, because I knew I once got comments on my videos, and I'll have a couple of people that comment on pretty much sort of most videos that I produce, which I'm really grateful for, because not only does it help the algorithm to help push me a little bit as well, but it's nice to have that interaction. I enjoy the interaction, and I enjoy replying to people and what have you, and so it's really great to to have that, as I say, interaction going. Um, but yeah, I sort of looked through those messages and read every single one of them again, and people telling me, oh, no, actually, you've got this wrong. That's a corn crib, and it was used for this, that, and everything else. And by the way, really love the history that you gave and what have you. And so I thought, well, I need to get back to that. I need to get back to a point where I'm giving a history lesson, where I'm, sort of telling everyone, the way things are and what have you. And yeah, very much need to, as I say, get back into the swing of that. So I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about, um, as I say, the history, and I hope I'm interesting enough to listen to and what have you, for you to, take something away from, not only this episode but the previous episodes as well. And like I say, at some point, I think this week, more than likely, we will be we'll be getting on with our harvest. Our wheat will nearly be ready. The field to my left as we drive now, that's wheat. That's also nearly ready as well. So that will be combine if I do decide to buy them. And what I am going to do is, and I have made my mind up, so I'm going to buy 3 John Deere Lands combines. Now, I've said before, and I will say again, because I have had a couple of people comment and say, oh, actually, I think you'll find, such and such wasn't available at this time or whatever. And believe me, I have done my research. I'm not, I haven't been sort of kind of making stuff up as I go along. I do, um, do my research, and it was basically a comment about round balers, and then I replied to the comment that I got, and the person got back and said, okay, fair enough, I didn't realise, and fair enough, carry on, sort of thing. But yeah, so I'm going to buy the Lands John Deere combines. Now, the dairy farm didn't get them until 1962, but I can't find the particular the John Deere 55 combine. I can't find a mod of that anywhere, and by 1954 they were not using the pull behind combine. Now don't get me wrong, the combine that we're pulling behind the tractor at the moment that I've been using on the dairy farm isn't anything like what they had, but again, I couldn't find anything. It was the closest thing, and people kind of seemed okay with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to buy the 3 John Deere Lands combines, and we're going to use them. Yes, I know they're coming 10 years early, but it's because I can't find the actual self-propelled combines that the dairy had at that point. So you got to remember that back in the 1950s it was a dairy, predominantly a dairy. Now, still, predominant, it's a massive dairy. It's produces thousands and thousands, well, probably hundreds of thousands of gallons of milk a year. Probably, I don't know. Again, without looking at the figures of what's kind of going down there, I can't tell you for any certainty, but it's a big concern. But they do now have an arable side of the business too. Now Harry, as I said before, he does have arable. He also has dairy, not on the scale of the dairy farm itself, but he does have dairy. And in this episode I've sort of given a brief why they got dairy, why they got goats in the beginning, and where all that came from. Yeah, so I'm going to be using, as I say, those combines because they're the nearest thing. They're combines that they did have. I was chuffed as bits when I found them, and I thought if I could just find the 55 now, that means we can have 2 consecutive 10 years of combines that the dairy had. But I can't find 55 series John Deere self-propelled from 1952, I think it was, when they had them. So I've sort of gone 2 years over with the trail, but we are going to switch over this year to the self-propelled ones. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it was in 1954 that the dairy started to use, and Harry as well, actually, to be fair, Harry and the dairy started to use a grain chaser, not a grain chaser, gravity bins. I always forget the name of them. Started to use some gravity bins that were being released onto the market by a company not too far from them. And whilst they're not in game, again, someone has made a version of that gravity wagon, but in the name of Lizard. And again, when we're combining, I will talk about that gravity wagon, the history, where it came from, who made it, their history, where they came from, and stuff like that, because it does sort of tie into these episodes. So yeah, as I say, I really hope you've enjoyed the episode. I hope you've got something out of it. I hope you look forward to maybe getting some, or to the history lessons that are coming. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Is there anything that you would like to know about? Are you from Ohio? Do you know the Hill family? Just message in the comments. It'd be amazing to read and to hear about, stories and different things. Was you someone that farmed in the 1950s? Are you a second, third generation farmer that has taken over from, your dad, your uncle, or your grandpa, or whatever, from the 50s, and you're now running the farm today? It'd be really fantastic to hear from people. But I say I am going to leave this episode here. I've really enjoyed having your company. I've really enjoyed doing this episode, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye for now.